Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you, the viewers, get to ask me stuff. I am Ken Coughlin, Christian apologist, coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church in School in Joppa, Maryland. And back there on the other side of the glass is...
B.A. Thomas, who forgot to set up the camera.
You forgot to set up your camera?
Yeah, I forgot to set up my camera.
That's inexcusable. Inexcusable.
Sorry. Yeah.
So how long would it take you to set up the camera?
Oh, not long.
Because I'm going to talk for a while, you know. Tell you what, I'll give the intro.
Okay.
And just throw the byline for them to submit questions up there right now.
Okay.
And then that way it's up there. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And then you can set up your camera. Because we want a CBA. He's far more interesting to look at than I am. And besides, it gives you a behind-the-scenes look. You can, glance at the control room back there. So, hey, if you never watched the show before, thank you very much for watching. This is our weekly podcast here where the whole idea behind this show is it is viewer driven. We want to be able to find out what questions you out there in the world have about Jesus, the Bible, Christianity, God in general, world religions, anything that has to do with our faith, with our Christian faith, that you were always wondering about, you've heard someone else ask about, anything like that. We want to give you a forum to be able to ask it and to hopefully get me to be able to answer it. So if you have a question along those lines that you would like to see us answer on a future episode here of Hey Ask Me Stuff, here's how you get that submitted. You can go to our website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, and on there you will find a form that you can fill out online and submit any question that you may have, and then we will compile those questions and use them to figure out what our main topics are going to be. Occasionally, not every week, because I don't think we did this week, once we've picked kind of a general topic, we will also submit kind of prompt questions on our subreddit. Our subreddit is called Talk About God. So if you go on there, typically on Mondays when we do it, you will find some kind of question or prompt on Reddit, and you can answer there. And that's another way of potentially getting your comment and your thoughts here on the air. We are also broadcasting live every Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Eastern Time on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. If you are able to watch us live, then if you want to interact as we go along here, please feel free to do so. You can comment in the comment section on either YouTube or Facebook. And I have this lovely modern piece of technology here called a computer sitting next to me, where I have two tabs open, one for YouTube, one for Facebook, where I can see your comments as they pop up. And then BA hopefully will be able to see them as well. Although you have them on the computer behind you now, don't you? So you can't read them very easily.
Not very easily, no.
So maybe I'll read them then.
Oh, I'll pull them up on my phone too.
Oh, that'll work. Okay. Because typically he alerts me if I've missed anything, and then he will ask me the questions, and we can interact online as well. If you're not able to watch us live, but you're able to watch us after the fact, please go ahead and submit a question in the comment section, or your thoughts in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. Last week's episode, I had a really good exchange with some folks, including Brian Brownell, one of our favorite viewers here. He and I had a nice, healthy conversation about some of the topics from last week. And I think, Brian, if you're watching, I got to check. I think I still owe you an answer. I think you were the last one to speak, but I don't think I had a time to check what your last comment was. So I will get to that, I promise. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing this week, however. This week is, I don't want to say a little different, but most of you, if you know me at all, you know that I also teach 7th grade Christian Ed here at Trinity Lutheran Christian School. And so a couple days ago in class, I gave the kids all out some note cards, and I wanted to know what their questions were. I said, what are your questions about, Jesus, the Bible, God, anything like that? And so we can look through and maybe answer some of their questions. And so the beautiful thing about this is now we have an enormous stack of questions that we can choose from to try to work through them to help give them the answers that they're looking for as well. If any of them are watching the show here today, welcome. They're probably not watching it yet because I think school dismissal is going on right now. So unless they got a note to get out of school early to be home in time to watch the show live, they're probably watching it after the fact. But we're going to go through those. That does not mean that we're going to go through them every week because, like I said, other people, you're not excluded. Please go ahead and submit your questions there on that website, like I mentioned before, and we can get your topic on the air as well. But, over time here, we're going to gradually go through these questions that the 7th graders asked as well so they can get them answered. I do not, just so you all know, even though I kind of spurred that on and asked them what questions they had, I do not ultimately decide the question that we're going to be answering, that I'm going to be answering. That's what makes this fun and a little stressful because I never know until, maybe Monday what the topic is going to be. And even with these note cards, I handed them over to BA and Sarah Garner here in our media department. And BA, is your camera up now?
It is.
All right. Would you mind sharing with folks about how you guys chose what our topic was going to be today?
I mean, I can. Okay. I guess back in my memory, Ken handed us a bunch of note cards with questions on them. We awed, we laughed, we cried, and then we decided that these four note cards ask fundamentally the same question. So that's what we decided because it knocks out four of them all at the same time.
And do you remember what that question was? It's on the paper I gave you. Where's the paper?
Yeah. How do I know I'm following the right religion?
How do I know I'm following the right religion? Yeah, it was expressed in different ways. And lots of these students were great. I mean, they asked even multiple questions. So, like, I asked BA, like this card, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but you'll see I had him highlight, the questions that we are already addressing so that we can keep track of what we've addressed and what we haven't. But like you can see on this card, just part of the card highlighted because they asked multiple questions, and that's great. And we'll get to all of those. But this was obviously a question that was kind of common. Like 4 different students asked variations of the exact same question of how do I know I'm following the right religion? Like this question here was, how do we know that, if there are different religions and different beliefs, then how do we know that ours is true and right? And then here's another one that says, what if someone is struggling to believe and they say, what if they just made something up in the Bible? And what if someone just made up the Bible and Jesus? How do you know when religion is the right one or is true? Another great question. And I'm going to save this fourth one for later because I don't want to spoil it in case we don't have time. This one actually builds on the question a little bit more. And if we have time at the end of the episode today, we'll get to that one. If we don't, that'll be the topic for next week.
All right.
So let's see. But let's talk about that. How do I know I'm following the right religion? All right. And the way I think I put it in the description of this video on YouTube is, with all the options that are out there in the world, it's kind of like a religious buffet. And really, in a real sense, a lot of our modern culture kind of looks at religion that way. Like it's a buffet with all sorts of dishes. And if you like one particular dish, you can just take from that dish. But if you want to take a little bit from here and a little bit from there, you can do that. I gotta say, do you like Chinese food, BA?
Oh yeah, love it.
I love Chinese food. I made a mistake.
Oh no!
This past week, I know you don't make a mistake with Chinese food, but I did. Only in the sense, and this isn't really a mistake, but I decided every time we go to the Chinese restaurant, I always get the same things. Now, sometimes I do like to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, so I have like my favorites. Like I always get beef and broccoli, shrimp lo mein, General Tso's chicken, some fried wontons. I've got my usuals, right? Yeah. My safety foods. Yeah. And I decided to try something different. Now, I'm not that daring. I still got some of my basic fallback foods. Yeah. But then I got like Hunan chicken and shrimp.
Oh, love a good Hunan.
Do you? You see?
Yeah.
And I liked it. Mm-hmm. But I quickly realized that what they don't tell you is that the vegetables they make it with, they have mushrooms. At least in my particular Chinese restaurant, it comes with mushrooms, come with cashews, and I don't like mushrooms or cashews. Oh. And so what I don't like is I don't like having to weed through my food. Yeah. Okay. So I, at the big buffet of religion, would not necessarily be, I have my safety ones and I just want to stay there. But
yeah, you're not a casuist.
I'm not a casuist.
Yeah, okay, got it.
But that's the metaphor that a lot of people think of religion-wise. It's a big buffet and they have all sorts of things to choose from. But if we start from the assumption, like all these questions did, and I got to say it, I'm proud of these kids for this part. They all are starting from the assumption that there is such a thing as truth, as something that is true and correct. And so if you have all these choices, how do you know what you're choosing is actually the correct one, the one that's actually accurate, that's true? If any of them are. I mean, it's possible for all religions of the world. I mean, logically speaking, it's possible that all religions of the world are false. Mm-hmm. It's not possible that they're all true because they do contradict each other on a lot of different key points. Another analogy that an apologist that I look up to greatly, his name's Greg Kokel, that he uses is the difference between insulin and ice cream. A lot of people will look at religious belief nowadays like it's ice cream. And if you ask the question, well, how do I know I'm following the right religion? The answer will be, well, does it work for you? You know, I mean, it's kind of like, well, how do I know if I'm eating the right flavor of ice cream? Well, do you like it? Does it taste good to you? If it tastes good to you, then go for it. And, that works for ice cream. It doesn't work for truth claims. All right. Yeah. It's kind of like, if you need insulin, you're not free to choose some other medication because you like the way it tastes better. Okay. It's not a matter of preference at that point. Yeah. If you have diabetes, you need insulin, period. That's the truth of the matter. And religion is more like insulin than it is ice cream, despite the way our culture talks about it. Religious belief is not a matter of personal preference because all world religions make some truth claims. They make some claims about the way the world is, about the way we as humans are, about what makes us tick, about what makes the world go round, And those claims are either true or they're false, all right? But they're not a matter of opinion. And so it is a legitimate question to ask, how do I know I'm following the true religion, the correct religion, if that the religious belief that I have is true and accurate? And so this whole cultural idea of, just believe whatever works for you really makes no sense and really does a disservice to world religions everywhere because world religions don't generally operate that way. Even ones that claim they do don't. But we're not going to go into a big, broad world religions conversation. But the other example I love to give is like if the test for what we should be doing and what we should believe is just whether it works for us, well, Jeffrey Dahmer thought killing people and eating them worked for him. Do you have a problem with that? I do. Call me crazy. No, let's call him crazy. I think that
works better. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, another now, a person may be perfectly happy. They're strolling along through the woods, and there's a sheer cliff in front of them, and they may be perfectly happy walking along that path. And you are telling them that there is a cliff ahead. And maybe they don't even want to believe you. They say, nah, I don't believe there's actually a cliff ahead because a trail that's this beautiful with these number of birds chirping couldn't possibly have a cliff ahead of it. All right?
Dodo reference.
Yeah, I mean, but I got news for you. No matter how much walking down that path works for them, they're going to be confronted with truth very abruptly when they step off that cliff. All right? Truth doesn't care about your preference. It doesn't care about your opinion, all right? So ultimately, the answer to the question of how do I know if I'm following the right religion is really pretty simple. Is it true? I mean, that's how you know. If your religion is true, then you're following the right religion. If it's not, then you're not following the right religion, no matter how much you may like it, no matter how much it may work for you. I mean, C.S. Lewis famously said, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he famously said that if he was creating a religion to make him feel good, Christianity wouldn't be it. He didn't believe Christianity because it made him feel good. He believed it because the evidence supported it, and it was true. And how do we, the question then becomes, I understand, I've oversimplified it. I've said, well, the test is it true? Okay, well, Ken, how do I know if it's true, though? I mean, how do we evaluate that, whether it's true or not? And as far as general principles for evaluating truth, I'm going to give you three. These may sound familiar to some people who have followed other Christian apologists, and they do admittedly come from the late Ravi Zacharias, who, let's not shy away from it, and I did some old shows back on our old show, Trinity Talk Live, about how I felt about this. He had a lot of failings that were discovered later in his life. And so by quoting his standards here, I am not in any way condoning his behavior. I am condemning his behavior. But that doesn't mean he was wrong about everything that he said, and this is a good model for evaluating truth, all right? And he said in order for something to be true, there's kind of three criteria you look for. Number one is logical consistency, all right? What that means is it has to be internally consistent. If I look at the entire breadth of all Christian claims, all right, everything Christianity teaches, all right, it can't contradict itself, all right? It can't, in one point say that there's one God, another point say there's 50 million gods, all right? Those would be two conflicting claims, all right? So you look at the belief system itself, And just within the teachings of that belief system itself, they have to be consistent. They can't be contradictory. That's logical consistency. All right. The second element you look for in evaluating whether a religion in this case is true, and this applies beyond just the religious realm, but we're talking about religions today, is empirical adequacy. All right. What empirical adequacy means is it has to be able to make sense of the world. In other words, now we're not just looking within the claims of the religion itself. Now we're looking at the evidence from the world around us and saying, well, does what that religion says is true fit with the evidence of what we see in the world around us? So it has to be internally consistent. It has to be externally consistent with what we see in the evidence of the world around us. And the last one that Ravi Zacharias suggested was it has to have experiential relevance. And in other words, it has to say something, the religious belief has to say something that's meaningful to our existence, all right? Truth, you look at any truth claim, it has bearing on our lives. Like the truth that there is a cliff in front of you has significance, all right? And what we find is that if something, in theory, could you have something that is true that's completely meaningless? Sure, but why would you care? Because it's completely meaningless, all right? Yeah. And so those are the three criteria you look to use as a framework for evaluating any religious claim to see if it's true or not. Is it logically consistent, meaning internally consistent within itself? Does it have empirical adequacy, meaning does it make sense of the world? Is it consistent with the evidence we see in the world? And does it have experiential relevance? Does it say something meaningful, all right? Now, I obviously cannot, in the time we have in this podcast, go through each and every single one of these in gory detail to show you how Christianity fits all three of these. Even any one, we could go on forever and ever and ever. But I'm going to give you an example of number 2, empirical adequacy, because this, I think, more than even the other two criteria, is really what makes Christianity stand out amongst the other world religions. All right? What you'll see with a lot of world religions, and to be honest with you, I would venture to say most world religions outside of Christianity, is they shy away from this empirical adequacy criteria. They actually don't spend a lot of time trying to show how their religion fits with the evidence we see around us. In the world we see around us, we're almost just told to just believe. Maybe you're told just believe because your parents believe. Maybe in some places, there's some place in the world where you are told by the government to just believe or under penalty of death, and so that is a lot of world religions are presented that way, as you just need to just believe, don't question, don't look around you, don't look at the evidence around you, just believe. Well, I would say that is the sign of a weak religious view. That's the sign of, if somebody's telling you that does not give you a lot of confidence that they think that their worldview would actually hold up if you evaluated it based on the evidence. If somebody tells you don't look at the evidence, just believe, I think your response should be, why should I be afraid to look at the evidence? All right? And that is not what Christianity does. Now, some people will claim, well, Christianity says you should have faith. It's all based on faith, right? Yes, but what does Christianity mean by faith? And those of you that have taken classes with me before know that I have said till I'm blue in the face that a good substitute word for what the Bible means by faith, saving faith, is trust. It's about trusting Jesus, all right? Faith, Christianity, when it talks about having faith, does not mean blind faith. Matter of fact, there's plenty of examples throughout the Bible of God himself, of Paul, of everybody else using evidence from the world around us to support their claims. This is exactly what God did in the plagues of Egypt. You go back and you look at what it says in the book of Exodus, and it talks about God's bringing these plagues so that the Egyptians will know that he is the one true God. He's giving them evidence to back up his claim, all right? That's throughout the Bible, throughout the Christian faith, and throughout the Jewish faith too, for that matter. Now, this is something that actually makes Christianity stand out amongst world religions. This fact that it does not run away or shy away from that empirical adequacy test. Our faith, and us Christians, our faith, unlike any other world religion, literally any other one, is based upon a historical event. Period. All right? Christianity says Jesus died on the cross 2,000 years ago, and then on the third day, he rose again from the dead. All right? It's a historical claim. It's a historical event, and not something like some, Greek myths and everything that tell these historical stories, but they're always from some nondescript long time ago. You can't really pin it on or anything. No. The Bible gives you historical context. Scholars can pin this down. Most of them, think this was probably AD 30 to 33 time frame. So it's like we can look at the historical figures, what was going on around it, to pinpoint when this event actually happened, to put it within its historical context. And so Christianity says, look, if this event happened, it happened for a reason. It happened for the reason to provide evidence that Christianity is true, right? So if the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ happened, Christianity is true. If the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ did not happen, Christianity is false. All right. And that's just not me telling you. How about the Apostle Paul tells you that? All right. And this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 14. Paul says, "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." The Christian faith is useless if Jesus didn't really, historically, rise from the dead. Wow. That's a bold statement for somebody who's supposed to be defending Christianity to make, isn't it? Yep. But that's the point. All right. Christianity, unlike other world religions, does not shy away from that. We say, yes, there is a historical event that you can test. It is a testable religion, all right, to see if it's true or not. So, really quickly to give you an overview, and again, there's lots of evidence that I could cite, for Christianity, from the existence of objective morality to the creation of the universe. B.A. and I were just talking about general relativity before this. That's another whole line of argument I could go down. But right now I'm focusing on what Paul focused on, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I will say, if any of my students do watch this show, either live or after the fact, we're going to have a unit on this. So take notes. You're getting a head start. Come around Easter time in the spring, we're going to be talking about exactly this. And it's what's called the minimal facts approach to the resurrection. And again, I'm just giving you one illustration of how the Christian faith embraces this empirical adequacy test for truth and shows how it meets it. And that is the historical truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. What the late Dr. Gary Habermas, I think he passed. Maybe he didn't. I might be killing him off too early. Norman Geisler passed away. Gary Habermas, I think, is still alive. Dr. Gary Habermas came up all the way back in his PhD dissertation. He came up with something called the minimal facts approach to the resurrection. And what he did with this is he took certain facts that virtually all historians agree upon. I don't mean all Christian historians. I mean all historians of that era who are studying this first century, Near East. All of them agree upon these particular facts. And he looks at those facts and he says, how can all of those facts be true? Explain how all of these facts can be true. And of course, he offers up one explanation, and his explanation is, well, Jesus rose from the dead. And you quickly see that if Jesus actually did rise from the dead, that explains all of these facts. But if you don't think Jesus rose from the dead, then you have problems, because now all of a sudden you're left with facts that you can't explain. All right, and here's what he said. He listed 6 in his original dissertation. Number one thing that virtually all historians of the time agree upon, that Jesus died by crucifixion. He did, in fact, die, and he was crucified. All right. Number 2, that very soon after his crucifixion, his followers had real experiences that they thought were actual appearances of the risen Jesus. All right. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say that all historians out there agree that Jesus really did rise from the dead and really did appear to these people. But what he does say that virtually all historians agree upon is that the early disciples legitimately thought that he did. All right. And so you have to explain, one of the things you're going to have to explain away with any theory you come up with is, why would they legitimately believe this? All right. Number 3, he said that their lives, the lives of Jesus' followers, were transformed as a result, even to the point of being willing to die specifically for their faith in the resurrection message. Does that mean every single early apostle died for their belief? Well, the church tradition says they did. Everyone except John. All right. But this claim doesn't even go that far. It just says that there are incidents. We can point to incidents of early believers who believed they saw the risen Christ and were willing to die for that belief. There's other non-biblical evidence, for example, of James, the brother of Jesus, and the fact that he was executed. And And then number 4, that these things were taught very early, soon after the crucifixion. So all these beliefs about Jesus' death and resurrection were not developed later on. Sorry, Bart Ehrman, you're wrong. There's plenty of evidence that these beliefs were taught very, very early on. Primary piece of evidence for that is I'm trying to figure out, I had this later in my notes, I'm going out of order, from 1 Corinthians 15. Oh, no, it is right here in my notes. Look at that. 1 Corinthians 15 has a creed. Just like we have creeds today, if you think of like the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, if you're just talking, like I'm talking regular conversation, just like this, nice casual tone, we're having a chat, we're having a talk, and then all of a sudden I say, I believe in the Lord, God the Father Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth. There's a tonal shift there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
You can tell by the tone of my words, the words that I was presenting, the way I was presenting them, there's almost a rhythm to a creed, for example, that the tone of conversation has changed, all right? And that's one way you can tell. But when you look back at the book of 1 Corinthians and you get to this 15th chapter, you see Paul do exactly that, all right? He slips into a creed, all right? And based on when 1 Corinthians was written and tracing back to the history, Paul's history that we get from like the book of Acts and things like that, most historians date this creed back to 30 to 35 AD. So this is a very early creed after Jesus' crucifixion. This comes out pretty much right after Jesus' crucifixion. And he said in there, for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, Cephas, and then to the 12. And so we see a very early creed that affirms a lot of these beliefs, that Jesus died, that he was buried, that he rose, that he appeared, all right? So these beliefs, we have evidence that they were there very early on. And that is the 4th minimal fact that Dr. Habermas quoted, that these beliefs were taught very early on, very soon after the crucifixion. Number 5, that James, Jesus' unbelieving brother, became a Christian due to his own experience that he at least thought was the resurrected Christ. So you had his brother who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah, who had some experience that you're going to have to explain away that he thought was his brother alive after he was dead, and as a result, he changed and he became a believer. And then the last one that Dr. Habermas quotes is that the Christian persecutor Paul, who was formerly Saul of Tarsus, also became a believer after a similar experience. All right. So he gives 6 facts that historians almost universally agree upon. Jesus died by crucifixion. Soon afterwards, his followers had these real experiences that they thought were the risen Christ, that their lives were transformed as a result, even to the point of some of them at least being willing to die for it, that all these things about his resurrection, his death and resurrection, were taught very early on, that James, his brother, didn't believe, then something happened, made him to believe, and that Paul, who not only didn't believe but was persecuting Christians, turned around and believed. So those are the 6 facts that Dr. Habermas quoted. Over time, people have built on this argument, and they've kind of added a 7th. And some others give even more than that, but I think the 7th one is well grounded, and that is that Jesus was buried in a known tomb. All right? That when Jesus, after he died, was taken down from the cross and he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. People knew where that tomb was, all right? Now, some skeptics have argued against that, and they've tried to claim, well, but historical documents show us that the Romans would not allow bodies to be taken down after crucifixion, that they left the bodies on the cross and let the vultures eat them as a warning to any future wrongdoers not to do this. And that is true. That was the general Roman practice. However, you can't cherry pick your historical evidence. And there's also plenty of other historical evidence and historical documents, not just documents, but archaeology as well, that shows that at least in times of peace, which this was at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, there was no Jewish uprising going on at the time, that in order to try to keep the peace, the Roman Empire did allow the Jews to take down their people off the cross and bury them. Because in Jewish belief, both at the time and now, to leave a dead body out after the sunset was a major affront. It was seen as defiling the land. And so they would not allow that to happen. And whether it be Josephus, historian Josephus, or Philo of Alexandria, these are both first century historians, Jewish historians, both of them give examples of where the Romans did in fact allow the Jews, and it was their practice to allow the Jews to take down the bodies. And if you don't believe them, well, how about you believe archaeology? Because in 1968, archaeologists actually dug up a bone box. That's, Jewish burial tradition. They would lay the body in the tomb for a year, let it decompose, and then when all that's left was bones, they would collect those bones, put them in a small box, and that box would get put in a little shelf area to save space so they could use the tomb down for somebody else. All right. Well, they discovered a bone box and guess what they found in the heel bone? A crucifixion nail. So obviously, that person was allowed to be buried, all right, even after being crucified. And so the overwhelming evidence is that, yes, the Roman Empire did allow Jews to take down the bodies and bury them. Plus, the other thing is, well, what about the fact that I say it was buried in a known place? Not just that Jesus was buried, but that he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And this gets to a historical principle called the principle of embarrassment. And this is just a general historical principle. If you're trying to evaluate whether something you're reading in some ancient document really happened or not, there's lots of different things that historians look at to make that determination. But one of them is the principle of embarrassment. And what that says is this: someone, if they're making up a story, is not likely to make up a version that embarrasses the author, all right, that makes them look bad. All right. If they're going to make something up, they're going to make up something that's going to make them look good, not something that's going to make them look bad. Understand that the Gospels all lambaste the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, because they're the ones that led to Jesus, sentenced Jesus to death, right? They're the bad guys in this story. Well, guess who Joseph of Arimathea was? He was a member of the Sanhedrin. All right. You're not going to spend all this time saying, bad Sanhedrin, boo, bad guys, boo, boo. Oh, except this one did the right thing and actually gave Jesus a proper burial. Okay, if you're going to make up a burial narrative, it ain't going to be a member of the Sanhedrin whose tomb you're going to say he was put in. All right, so that again gives us evidence that, yes, he really was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So that gives you a seventh fact, all right, that Jesus was buried in a known tomb. They knew where the body was, all right. And so the way this looks, and we're talking about this empirical adequacy standard, the way this all shapes up is, okay, explain those facts. If Jesus didn't die and rise again, how do you explain all those facts? Obviously, if he did die and rise again, that makes perfect sense of all those facts, doesn't it? Well, the first one says he died by crucifixion. Well, yeah, check, that fits, all right? That soon afterwards his followers had real experiences. Well, yeah, if he really rose and appeared to them, check, that fits. All right, their lives were transformed as a result. Mine would be too if I saw Jesus come back to life.
Yeah, probably would be too.
Yeah. Check. Number 4, these things were taught very soon. Well, yeah, it happened. You're commanded, Great Commission, to go out and spread these things. Did James saw the risen Christ and changed? Yep. Paul saw the risen Christ and changed? Yep. And the fact that he was buried in a known tomb is something that more overcomes an objection to it. And so that's what you want to say. All these facts fit on the hypothesis that what the Bible says is true. All right. So if you have an alternative hypothesis, does it fit the facts? All right. One theory that even the Bible records the early Jews saying this is that, the Christians stole the body. All right. Well, if they stole the body, would they have legitimately believed that they saw the risen Christ if they knew that they stole the body? No. I mean, it doesn't fit that. I mean, because keep in mind, it's not just that they said they saw it, it's that they have a legitimate belief that they saw it, and were even, for some of them, willing to die for that belief. I think it was G. Gordon Liddy, who was one of the Watergate conspirators, that said part of the reason after he was convicted and went to prison, he ended up becoming a Christian. And he said, part of the reason I became a Christian was because I quickly learned that through the Watergate conspiracy, that you couldn't get 12 men to stick to their story for even a few months, let alone for the rest of their lives into their deaths. And so if you were participating in a great scam and you stole the body to try to convince people he rose again from the dead, then you're not going to die for that. People die for false beliefs all the time. They don't often die for things that they know to be false because they were the ones that perpetuated the falsehood in the first place. Yeah. All right. Another one, for example, is the swoon theory. The swoon theory basically said that Jesus didn't really die, that he just pretended to die, and so he never died in the first place. Then he just, boom, pops out, oh, look, I'm alive again. I mean, aside from the fact that doesn't fit with medical testimony as far as what we see actually happened to him, he wasn't just crucified. You had the cat of nine tails whipping beforehand. You had them stabbing him with the spear, which shows he had a swollen heart. When you see the fluid that comes out, and the Bible records that, that's because of swelling around the heart. which happens when you die. The evidence is overwhelming that he did die. He would not have survived that. And even if he had somehow survived that ordeal, nobody would have mistaken him for a resurrected, powerful God figure afterwards. They would have looked at him and said, oh my gosh, let's get you to a hospital, or the first century equivalent, right?
Yeah.
And so that doesn't make sense of their lives being transformed and everything after that. And of course, some people just say, well, it's all made up. The whole story is made up. And this is one of the questions on the cards. How do we know somebody just didn't make it up? Well, if Jesus was buried in a known tomb, and you've got a lot of people going around saying Jesus rose from the dead, what's the easiest way to disprove that? Go get the body.
Yeah.
Just show it. And I don't care, even if the body was somewhat decomposed at that point, at this point, you pull pretty much anybody out of that tomb, and you're going to squelch that belief. And that, but they couldn't. And there's a reason we have no historical record of anybody even trying to do that, because they couldn't, because the tomb was, in fact, empty.
Yeah.
All right. So that's just one example of how this minimal facts approach it shows one way that Christianity welcomes this challenge. Yes, any worldview should meet that empirical adequacy standard. It should make sense of the evidence around us. All right. The biggest claim Christianity makes is a dead man came back to life. All right. And if we happen in history, we'll tell you when it happened. We'll tell you who was the prefect at the time. We'll tell you all of that so you can test it. And sure enough, when we test it, sure looks like it was true, like it really did happen. People ask me why I'm a Christian. I don't say, well, because my parents grew up and took me to church and all that. That's how I became a Christian. All right. People hear me say that, they'll think, well, if your parents happen to be Hindu, you'd be Hindu right now. That's not, I don't answer how I became a Christian. I answer why I am a Christian. And why I'm a Christian is because, well, I can't not be. The evidence is so overwhelming that everything surrounding Christianity and the Christian claims is true, including the resurrection of Jesus, that it would take more blind faith for me to deny it. And so I just can't bring myself to do that. The evidence is overwhelming about that. All right. So that's an overall summary. How do you know that you're believing the right religion? Short answer, because it's true. How do you know it's true? You look at it from those three lenses. Is it internally consistent? Right? We call it logical consistency. Number one, does it contradict itself? Any of its claims contradict each other? Number two, is it empirically adequate? Does it make sense of the evidence of the world around us? And that's really what I focused on for this, up to this point in the podcast for Christianity. And number three, is it experientially relevant? Does it say something meaningful for us, all right, that makes sense and helps us, deal with life, as we say. And if you evaluate any world review based upon those three criteria, I think what you find out, what I have found, is that Christianity is the only one that meets all three. Now, some people will say, well, gee, Ken, does that mean, how can I possibly go through every single world religion and apply this test? You don't have to, because world religions can be categorized. All right. For example, I'm going to talk here in a minute to close out this podcast about what's called monotheism. Mm-hmm. Monotheism is the belief there's one and only one God. All right. And there are three religions in the world today, major world religions, that believe that there's one and only one God: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. All right. Yep. So if let's say I'm evaluating world reviews that think there's more than one God, a whole bunch of gods, called polytheism, all right? And I'm evaluating polytheism versus monotheism. And I decide, no, polytheism doesn't make sense, only monotheism makes sense. Well, just from that broader evaluation, I've now eliminated this whole class of religions. I don't need to look at them all individually to know those all can't be true. So now I've narrowed my search down to these three. All right. And now I look among the differences between those three. So you kind of do it, from the broad, the general to the more specific. And what you do is, as you eliminate, you come down to one. That's Christianity that meets those three standards. All right. I do, in the few minutes we have left, because it's 3:38 by my clock here, and so I think we got a little bit of time left. I do want to hit that fourth question.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go for it.
The fourth question, and it was the same basic question, but it went a little more specific. It asked, why did other religions come up with false gods if there's only one God? So if the truth is that there's only one God, where did these other religious views come up with? How did they come up with this idea? There's a whole bunch of gods out there. And even that, I will tell you, is actually, there are a lot of religions that have even more radically different beliefs than what you've hit on in this question. The answer to that question of where did where do these ideas of multiple gods come from? Well, it depends on who you ask, I guess, to some extent, because you're going to get different answers to that from me, and I'll give you my answer in a minute, versus if you ask an atheistic scholar, somebody who doesn't believe in the existence of God, which a lot of historians don't, okay? So the first thing you need to ask when you're hearing anybody answer this question is, what's your starting point, all right? Is your starting assumption that God exists or that God doesn't exist? Because if you start out by assuming God doesn't exist, you're going to have to answer your question in one way. If they start out assuming that God does exist, then they're going to answer your question a different way. Obviously, I believe God does exist. I don't believe it on blind faith. I've just given you one example of why I believe God exists, because I think the evidence is overwhelming. The resurrection is a historical event. It really happened, all right? Got lots of other reasons, too. But let's take that first then. Let's say that you've got a historian who does not believe God exists. Well, obviously he can't use God in his explanation at all, right? So he's got to come up with some reason, some history. How did religious belief even happen in the first place? How did people come to have these wacky ideas about gods and spirits and all this kind of stuff if none of it's true? And that's the challenge that an atheistic historian or anthropologist, if you don't know, those are people who study cultures, world cultures, and the development and changes of cultures over time. How would they come up with it? How would they explain it? Well, you've probably heard of a little book called The Evolution, oh my gosh, and now I'm playing it. Charles Darwin,
oh goodness.
Brain fart
Theory
now.
of Evolution? I don't know what it's called.
It's about the natural species. Oh my gosh.
I really wish you wrote it down.
Ken.
I'm going to look it up, and I'll say it. We'll both have
We'll see who gets it first. I cannot believe I'm drawing
Origin of Species?
Origin of Species, thank you.
Without Google.
Without Google, very good, thank you. Yes, The Origin of Species. Hold on. For those of you that are watching the show in the past few weeks, my earpiece was going out, and we figured out that it was a hardware issue. And so I had, for the longest time, my pack sitting right here in just the right position so I could hear BA.
Yeah.
And now I just hit it with my hand.
Oh, no.
And so right now, BA, I can't hear you.
Oh, no.
My green light went off, and it's not coming back. I can't get it back. I broke it. Can you open the door so I can hear you? And if I get it back, I will let you know, but I don't have it right now. All right. So if you're following a naturalistic viewpoint, you don't believe God exists. Well, what happened when The Origin of Species came out? Charles Darwin proposes this evolutionary theory for how different species came to be. Naturalistic evolution, natural selection. We all heard these terms. Well, people got so gung-ho about this theory, they thought it was the bee's knees, that they started applying it to everything. Okay? It wasn't enough anymore just to say that biological species evolved. Now we got to say everything's evolving. This is evolving, and that's evolving, and everything's evolving. And so naturally, what happened, no pun intended, when naturalists, had to come up with a theory for where religious belief came from, where do you think they go? They go to evolution, right? And they say, well, therefore, religious belief must also be a result of evolution. Not biological evolution, but the beliefs themselves evolved. And so they then came up with some starting assumptions, all right? The starting assumptions of, under an evolutionary theory of the origin of all these different world beliefs. BA, do you have the ability to get online and delete the comment that just came on YouTube, please?
I'll get started on it right now.
All right, thank you. The idea of the naturalistic had these starting assumptions. Number one, religion is an aspect of human culture. All right, that's what it's not because of any actual existence of any divine beings. It's just a cultural phenomenon. All right. Number two, religion began very primitive. And then over time, these religious beliefs became more and more complex. Very childlike in the beginning, and then got greater and greater levels of complexity. That's what evolution says about anything, right? And number three, as a result of this, what happens is religion in the least developed cultures. So if you have a culture, even in the world today, for example, that is still learning to use basic tools, all right, then that culture's religious beliefs will most likely be most similar to early cultures from a long time ago's religious beliefs, because as a culture develops, its religious beliefs also develop. So if we want to know what people believed thousands and thousands of years ago, we look to things like the Aboriginal people. It was a very common study in Australia, especially before they were invaded by Western culture around them. And here in the Americas, the Native American, when the Native American tribes was another source that was studied extensively as well. And those places that weren't as developed, those cultures that weren't as what we in the West think of as developed nations, developed cultures, their religious beliefs should be most similar to old religious beliefs, which means we would expect them to be less developed, or as a lot of people say, more childlike. All right? So, following these assumptions, naturalistics came up with this kind of hierarchy, this order of that we would see that we think religions came about in. All right? The very earliest form of religious belief was what some call mana, and basically it's just this kind of vague, general sense that there's some kind of spiritual forces at work around us. Not even personal, we're not naming anything, just some kind of forces that operate around us, and this is where the magic comes from. The idea is that we could manipulate these forces through magic, all right? That's supposedly the earliest form of religious belief, all right? Then after that comes what anthropologists call animism. Animism is just when we take a look at these spiritual forces, and now we think they're personal, all right? Now we think this, it isn't just a blind force. This is a spirit called a nature spirit or an ancestor spirit. Those are the most common ones that you would see in these animistic beliefs, all right? And then after animism, the next step up in the evolutionary progression of religious belief was polytheism, which would now, instead of just these spirits, and these spirits lots of times, they're not necessarily a whole heck of a lot more capable than us human beings are, but a god is. And so now we take these spirits, it was a force, and then we named it as a spirit, and now we take the spirit and we make it all the more powerful, and we call it a god. So now we got a whole bunch of gods out there. And then even after polytheism, which is the belief in multiple gods, there's a kind of an intermediate step called henotheism. And henotheism is like, okay, we believe there's multiple gods, but we only worship one of them, all right? And then the end of the progression is monotheism, there's only one God. So people who don't believe in God at all, who don't believe in religion, and this kind of say, well, it's just a social construct, it must have developed this way. This is what they say. And that's all well and good if you start out with the belief that religion evolved, religious belief evolved, all right? The problem is, this we talked about empirical adequacy, guess what? It doesn't fit the evidence, all right? The evidence doesn't support it. So you may want it to be true if you are a blind adherent to evolutionary theory in all things. That may be great. But guess what? It still has to fit the evidence, all right? And it doesn't. And this is a book here I'm going to recommend. This is called Neighboring Faiths by Winfried Corduan. And this is not a beginner book. This is a seminary book, all right? There are other world religion type books as well out there. But this is, if you ever want to really in-depth study of world religions, if you read this book, you will discover religions discussed in here that you didn't even know exist in the world today. All right, it's a very good deep dive into different world religions, and it does talk about the origin of religion in one of the early chapters, maybe even chapter 1. But it's a really good book, and so a lot of what I'm saying today comes from that. So the problem is that this whole evolutionary theory of how religious belief came about, it just doesn't hold up when we look at the evidence, all right? For example, if you look historically over the religious beliefs of different cultures, we don't see that they're making this gradual progression from less complex to more complex as this kind of pyramid defines less complex and more complex. We don't see them going from mana to animism, and then to polytheism, and then henotheism, and then monotheism. You see cultures jumping all over the place. They go back and forth, up and down, left and right, all over the place. There's not a clear progression from one to the other, all right? The other thing is, remember, this belief said that, hey, well, if we look at the least primitive tribes today, they should be most similar to those early beliefs. Well, that also is not true. A lot of studies of the Aboriginal people, of Native American tribes, found, for example, that they do believe, a lot of them hold beliefs to like a single one creator God, all right? not just pure mana, magic, not just pure animism, but an actual creator, divine creator being. And so the evidence doesn't fit there either. You look at ancient civilizations, like I think it's the Sumerians, that some of their writings, while the Sumerians were a polytheistic culture, you look at some of their writings that have been discovered through archaeology, and when they're describing their version of ancient history, they say that, well, even though we believe in multiple gods now, there was a time a long time ago when our people all just worshipped one God. All right. And so we don't see the evidence supporting this progression from the way the evolutionists believe it should. In competition to that, the alternative view, and the one that I hold, and this is how I'm going to answer your question about where do these world beliefs and all these different gods come from, is what's known as original monotheism. And again, this is something that's explained by Dr. Cordron in his book a lot, so I'd recommend that. But the idea of original monotheism is that if we go way back in history, originally God revealed himself as one and only one. And have you ever played a game of telephone? BA, do you like the game of telephone?
Not much.
You don't like, you've played it though, right?
Yeah, I have.
Have you ever successfully played it?
Oh, no, never, ever. Not a single time.
I mean, and that's, those of you who don't know the game of telephone, I mean, that's where, somebody whispers a message in one person's ear, and then they have to take what they hear and whisper it in the next person's ear, who whispers it in the next person's ear, and so on and so forth. And then the person at the end says what they heard, and everybody has a big laugh because it bears no resemblance whatsoever to what was originally said, right? Or maybe it has a word or two there, but it's largely, it's gone off the rails. The theory of original monotheism is basically like historical telephone. All right, it's that the original message was there's one God and only one God. All right, and then because we're imperfect, sinful humans, we start going to that buffet of potential beliefs and picking out what we think works, what we like, what makes us more comfortable. And so over time, we start changing that bit. It starts out as bits and pieces, but of course it steamrolls over time or snowballs over time, and the changes get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's where we start seeing this wide breadth of different types of religious belief today. Now, does the historical evidence fit with that? Well, yes. Number one, a lot of what I've already told you, I've told you about the evidence for, whether it be in what we call more primitive cultures today, having some of this monotheistic type of beliefs in them. We also see, like I said, the ancient Sumerians describing that. But here's the other thing, is that even at the end of a game of telephone, there's usually one or two words that are still there. All right? There's something that has carried all the way through. And so if original monotheism is correct, all right, then what we should expect arguably to see is obviously world religions have gotten completely off the rails in a lot of respects. But can we look at world religions and see at least some aspects of that original monotheism still peeking through here or there? And the answer to that is yes. And this is something that Dr. Cordron describes in his book. He says that he actually gives a list of like 9 things, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but 9 defining characteristics of this original monotheism. And he says, if we look at virtually all religions today, guess what we see? We see some form of at least one of those 9 things still present in every world religion today. So it looks like, based upon the evidence, that the earliest forms of religious belief were actually monotheistic, belief in one God, all right? And then, just like a game of telephone, we messed that up over time and started bringing in all these other beliefs. But we can still, in any world religion, still see some seed of that original truth that's still in there. That doesn't mean they haven't gotten off the rails on some very fundamental things. They have. But the development of religious belief that we can see through the evidence seems to fit more with an original monotheistic framework than with this evolutionary framework, if that makes sense. All right. Did any of that make sense today, BA?
Forgot to turn myself on there. It made sense. Yeah. At least the first part.
This was, oh, wait, I got you back. Wait.
Hey,
oh, no, I lost it. Dang, damn
Oh.
it. I had you for a second.
Oh, well.
Okay, let's see. Can I do this? This is fun. Trying to get a green light. Green light, green light.
Red light.
I got
Green
nothing.
light. Red
Oh, wait,
light.
wait, right there. I can't move my hands.
He literally can't.
I can hear you right now. I have
Okay.
green lights. I'm not going to move this.
Okay. Good luck saying goodbye.
This is exciting. Oh, man. All right. Well, anyway, if you have any questions about anything that we talked about today, go ahead and if you're watching us after the fact, put them in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to interact with you. And again, if you have any questions, I'm not moving. I don't need to hear you anymore. There we go. If you have questions that you would like to see us answer here on the show, please go ahead and submit them. Go to our website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. Fill out the form. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to answer whatever questions you have pressing on your heart out there. I do have a little bit of announcement for next week. All right. And I didn't even tell BA this, but he's probably just figuring this out from when next week is. We will not have a show next week. Next week is Thanksgiving Eve. Mm-hmm. We do have a worship service here at 6 o'clock, right?
Yes.
Yeah, at 6 o'clock here at Trinity. And that has to be broadcast and live streamed and all of that. And BA and I both are responsible for that. Yeah. And so there will not be a show next week. I know I've said that in the past, and I've done one pre-recorded. I'm not doing one pre-recorded next week. I've got my brother-in-law is going to be in town and some other things, so it's not happening.
Hold him to it.
And BA, I was actually going to tell you to come in late that day since we have to work late, but we'll talk about that when we're off the air. Because there's no point. You shouldn't be coming in at 8:30 in the morning and then working till 8 whatever at night. So yeah. So we'll figure that out. But anyway, so we're not going to do a show next week. We will be back in 2 weeks, however. So I don't know why I'm messing with this. I can't hear him anyway. So 2 weeks from now, Wednesday, 3 o'clock, we'll be live on the air with either another question from the card or your question if you submit it to us. Also, go ahead, please hit the like button here on this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got a lot of great things. As a matter of fact, I can't hear you, BA. I'm going to put you on the spot again because it's a show that we had 2 previous episodes of, but we kind of retroactively rebranded them to fit in this show. And for those of you who don't know, everybody here on the media team, I've given a responsibility for some new element of programming because our vision for this channel is not just, yes, we have the worship services. Yes, we have the weekly messages, but we want to give you a lot of other Christian-oriented content and fun content for you to digest throughout the week. And BA has a show that has a new episode that just went up. Why don't you tell people about it?
I did another episode of Just Real Quick. Just Real Quick is a how-to and what-to for video production. So if you've ever been curious about how to produce Christian content, this is the kind of stuff you have to do. So go ahead and look for it on this channel, just released this morning at 9 o'clock. So go ahead and give it another view, give it a like, and thank you.
There you go. And we got a lot more exciting things coming up. As you know, we have more episodes of the 513 show coming out. And they just did something really exciting that I won't spoil, but you guys had a film shoot yesterday for the new kind of programming that Sarah Garner's overseeing and directing. And that's going to be fun, too. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be funny. It's going to be good. So we got a lot of great programming. So please go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel because you're not going to want to miss out on any of it. And share this video, share other videos, let your friends know about them, okay? BA, thank you for everything today.
Hey, no problem.
Good show. And thank you all for watching. And if any of my 7th graders are watching, I want to give a special shout out to them. And thank you to all of you for being willing to submit the questions that we can answer here today. And if you have any follow-ups about anything I said, well, ask me in class. All right? See you all later. God bless.